Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today for the final session of St John's webinar programme. This session will cover preparing for interviews, and for the other sessions on preparing for personal statements or making competitive applications in general, please check out the St John's website. Hopefully you've already seen this graphic, but this is just a rundown of the general application process for Cambridge University. Just to show you where interviews fit in. So obviously the application deadline is the 15th of October. After that, you will be contacted by the college that you have applied to, and the majority of candidates are invited to interview. Interviews will take place in December. I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute, and you should hear back about interviews in January. As you should know, if you've joined any of our other sessions, we do take a holistic approach to the application process, which means that we take into account all of these different things, admissions assessments, personal statement, interviews, and any kind of contextual data we have. So don't worry too much about any individual part of the process. So why do we interview at Cambridge? Well, firstly, the majority of our candidates are highly competitive and most of them have got very similar predicted grades. Most of our candidates do have predicted grades which match our offer conditions, which is usually 1A star and 2A's for arts, or 2A stars and 1A for sciences. Most applicants also have fantastic references and personal statements. So essentially interviews go beyond the paperwork to find out more about you. We like to find out how suited you are to the course, whether you have a potential to study that at a high level, and finally whether you would benefit from the supervision system. The Cambridge teaching system is very, very discussion based. So you can kind of think about the interview a bit like a mini practice supervision. There's a lot of misconceptions about interviews at Cambridge and a lot of kind of horror stories that go around. So just to reassure you of a few things. Firstly, it's not a memory test or a quiz. It's not going to be like Mastermind where we sit you down and start firing questions at you. We're also not going to be asking you lots of trick questions or nonsense questions or questions with obvious answers. I think there's a lot of stories that float around, especially online, about Cambridge interviews. Do just remember that a lot of these have been taken out of context and they make a lot more sense when you understand what they're actually asking. For instance, I applied for English and I got told that you get handed a skeleton in your interview and get asked to talk about it. Obviously, that wouldn't be much good for me as an English student, but it would make a lot more sense in a medicine interview, which is what this person was actually talking about. So don't be frightened away by any kind of horror stories that you hear about Cambridge interviews. They probably make a lot more sense when you think about them. Finally, just to reassure you that it is in no way an assessment of what you wear, where you're from, what you look like, what you sound like, anything like that. We are interested in you as a person and as a student. We don't care about anything to do with your background or anything like that. So as I said before, the majority of applicants are called for interview for the majority of subjects. These interviews usually take place in early to mid-December. They are organised by the individual colleges. So if you apply directly to a college, they will be the one to contact you about this. Or if you make an open application, you'll be allocated to a college and they will contact you. The interviews are conducted by academics in the subject that you're applying for. So these are the people who will be your teachers if you get made an offer. The questions are predominantly academic and subject focused. You won't be asked that many questions about extracurricular activities, for instance. And yeah, it will be predominantly academic in nature, based on extrapolating from, for instance, A-level knowledge or any kind of wider reading that you've done. The interviews this year will be held online for St John's and the majority of other Cambridge colleges that will be held on Zoom. In terms of the logistics of it, you will have about 35 to 50 minutes total interview time, which may be broken up into multiple interviews. You'll usually have at least 2 interviewers for each interview. So if you have 2 interviews, for instance, you might have 2 on each of those. At St John's College, if you are interviewed here, you'll be invited to a virtual welcome desk with a tech check beforehand. This will just make sure that everything is working correctly. In terms of what to expect from the interview itself, you should be expecting discussion on recent academic work, any kind of wider reading or relevant work experience. Sometimes we may ask you to think about the practical applications of your subject or any kind of issues in the wider world, any kind of new scenarios you can apply existing knowledge to. Some other subjects might also give you some written material to have a quick look at before the interview. So maybe an extract from something, some kind of scientific problem, graph or data. So you may get asked to talk about that in your interview. Here are just a few top tips. In terms of the logistics of interviews, make sure that you take advantage of the fact that they're online this year. So you'll be in your own space, use that to your advantage. Sit somewhere comfortable, wear something comfortable, prepare things in advance, make sure your laptop is charged, make sure that you are in a space that you know that you are going to be comfortable with and that you're not going to have any kind of interruptions. If you have slightly iffy internet at home, think about doing your interview at school if you possibly can. Make sure that you're going to be absolutely comfortable in that scenario. Just to reassure people, if your internet does fail in the middle of your interview, there's plenty of time built in either side of interview to make space for that. So you will still get the total interview time that you're expecting. In terms of responding to your interview questions, make sure that you explain your thinking or trying to think out loud. Don't worry about being prompted or if you have to ask for any kind of clarification or anything like that. Obviously, we're not expecting you to have all of the knowledge you've ever learned at the tip of your fingers. If you can't remember something, it is completely fine for you to just say that and ask to be prompted on that. Don't be afraid to ask questions, ask for clarification, ask what they mean, or even ask questions about the question itself. And it is totally fine to stop and think about what you're going to say before you answer. It's completely okay to ask for support. And the reason for this is that we're looking for good learners. We're not looking for people who already know everything there is to know about a subject. Otherwise, there would be no point in coming to university to learn about it. Here are just a few examples of interview questions. These might be asked in, well, obviously, several different subjects. As you can see, most of these are not yes/no questions. They're questions that don't have a correct answer to them, and they're questions which will prompt discussion. All of these are obviously very big questions that you would have to actually think about the knowledge of your subject for, and it's not going to be a question of just sitting there and reciting kind of any A-level knowledge or anything that you've memorized that you're expecting to be asked about your subject. Obviously, there will be lots of differences between the different subjects. We have separate videos for arts and humanities, sciences and medical sciences. So head across to those videos if you are interested in a bit of a breakdown of what to expect from individual subject interviews. So for subject-specific interview information, head to our breakout room videos, which will be linked in the description of this video. We also have an interviews Q&A with the academics who ran the breakout room videos as well. You can also email us with any of the questions that you've got at either of these email addresses, and we also run weekly admissions clinics for any further questions. Recordings of all of the sessions, including this one, are available on the St John's College website. And finally, just to say good luck with your applications and don't forget the October 15th deadline. Thank you, bye.